The 2024 NFL season is just a few weeks away, so today I want to talk about the Seattle Seahawks and why I actually think that they might be a force in the NFC this year. So as I mentioned, let's talk about the Seattle Seahawks. I have 3 different reasons why I personally think that this year could be a really good year for the Seattle Seahawks and they could be a legitimate force in the NFC. Now before I get into the video, around 90% of you guys are not subscribed, so if you enjoy the video and if you enjoy the content, please hit the like and subscribe button because that would help me out a ton. Let's get into the video. So as I mentioned, I have 3 different reasons as to why I think the Seahawks are a legitimate force in the NFC. Let's start off with number 1, the team is actually really good. When you look at the entirety of the Seattle Seahawks team, there is a lot of really good and talented players. We'll go over the offense first, and then we'll go over the defense. I think the defense is extremely exciting, but let's talk about the offense first. The quarterback room is currently being held with guys like Geno Smith and Sam Howell. I'm intrigued to see if Sam Howell could potentially move his way up the depth chart to maybe be the starting quarterback at some point this season. Do I think that will happen? Probably not. I do think Geno Smith is a really good quarterback and a really solid starting quarterback, and I do think he's in for a pretty good year this year. But regardless of that, I still really do like the addition of Sam Howell. I actually thought he was an incredible pickup for this team. I was actually in favor of him going to the Pittsburgh Steelers to be their starting quarterback of the future. But I do think, given the fact that the Seattle Seahawks did not draft a quarterback, I believe that Sam Howell is a really good, solid young quarterback that could potentially turn into something. Then your running back room is currently being led with guys like Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. Again, a really good combination of guys here that I'm extremely excited about. Last year, we didn't quite get to see the full potential of what this combination of guys could do, but I do think this year it could potentially be on full display. Kenneth Walker is more of your receiving back type of guy, a bit more of a speedster, can do more with the ball in his hands. Whereas Zach Charbonnet, a big old bowling ball. That boy can hit people and they do not like getting hit by him. That motherfucker is big. Watching his highlights from when he was in college, I tell you what, I was extremely high on him. I thought there would be a lot of other teams that would pick him up, but I do think it was a really good pickup for the Seahawks last year, and I think it'll play really good dividends for them this year. Then, of course, the receiving core is probably the most talked about thing on this team the past couple years. Your trio of wide receivers with DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jackson Smith-Njigba are extremely exciting. We all know about DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, so there's really no big reason to talk about them that much, but I will say those guys are still incredible players, and I think DK Metcalf is starting to be snubbed a little bit too often from like the top 20 receivers in the league. With that said though, I expect Jackson Smith-Njigba to be a much better player than what he was last year. Last year didn't really get a sizable role with this offense till later in the season, but when he was featured a lot more in the offense was a lot better, and I do think Jackson Smith-Njigba will be able to elevate himself from that wide receiver 3 position to likely the number 2 next to DK Metcalf. I would not be shocked at all if Jackson Smith-Njigba is able to get around 1,000 receiving yards and have probably over like 70 or 80 catches on the year. Then your tight end room is the same as last year. Noah Fant is your number 1 guy, Pharaoh Brown number 2, and then whoever else behind him, doesn't really matter. Noah Fant is your main guy. He is like the prototypical average as can be tight end, but nothing wrong with that. He's pretty solid. Then the offensive line brought in some brand new additions, with Connor Williams being the latest addition to this offense. I also will say, and this is completely off topic, I loved the pickup of Christian Haynes late in the draft. I thought he was going to go a lot higher, but he ended up going to this team, and I thought it was a really good pickup. But in the offseason, you brought in Laken Tomlinson to pair up next to Charles Cross on that left side of the offensive line. Laken is not somebody who is your long-term player. He's a bit older. He's not really a Pro Bowl level guy, but, you know, he's a decent starter for now, and I think as you're developing some young guys behind him, like Christian Haynes, you know, he can be a serviceable guy for now. Your tackle duo of Abraham Lucas and Charles Cross is looking for sort of a bounce back year from last year. Charles Cross obviously had a pretty solid rookie season, but then, you know, last year wasn't really playing at the highest level. I expect both these guys to play at a much better level this upcoming season, and if not, you do have George Fant behind him, who's your swing tackle, who could easily replace them if need be. Going back to Connor Williams, I was actually quite surprised when I saw the news that he was still available this late into the offseason, and of course he would go to the Seattle Seahawks in a move that I think makes a lot of sense. They needed a more predominant center who can do a bit more things, and I think that Connor Williams is that guy. Pre-torn ACL and all those injuries, he was one of the better centers in the league for the Miami Dolphins, and I think given the fact that it was a cheap contract for 1 year, this is a really good risk-free bet. But that's it for the offense. I think the offense should be just as good as it was last year, if not a tad bit better. I'm quite excited to see the progression of the running back room and of course the receiving room. But let's move on to the defense, where I'm actually a bit more optimistic. Starting off with the defensive line, Jaron Reed, Leonard Williams, and Byron Murphy is such an exciting group of defensive linemen. You also have to throw in some names like Uchenna Nwosu in there as well. I am unbelievably excited to see those guys play, and I really do believe that Byron Murphy is going to be an incredible pickup for this defense. In this past draft, he was my nose tackle #1, and I think that he can just be an awesome pass rusher and can develop into being a really good defensive run stuffer. Then your linebackers are Tyrell Dodson, Jerome Baker, and I forgot to mention Boy Mafe earlier, but he is also there. I'm a lot higher on Tyrell Dodson than a lot of other people were. He was one of my top linebackers in this draft. Playing last year with the Buffalo Bills, when he was given opportunities, he played at a high level, and now he's going to get a ton more opportunities for the Seahawks defense, given the fact that they lost a couple linebackers in free agency. Then you brought in Jerome Baker, a solid linebacker that just really has to stay healthy, and you're going to get really good linebacker play. I like that pickup as well. Your cornerback room is really exciting with, of course, Devon Witherspoon and Tariq Woolen. Woolen took a bit of a step back last year, but I do believe he's going to be able to bounce back and have a pretty solid year next year. Whereas Devon Witherspoon will likely turn into your true cornerback 1 who can play a bit on the outside, can play on the nickel, can play quite literally everywhere. He is a total stud. I think the secondary is really complete with some pretty solid safeties in Julian Love and Rayshawn Jenkins. And then obviously you got to give credit to Trey Brown. He's still playing at a very high level. All in all, I think this secondary is maybe the strength of this defense, but man, I think this defense has so much talent, and given the fact that you have a certain head coach who has a lot of experience coaching some really good defenses, who we may or may not talk about here in a little bit, I think this defense has a really legitimate chance of being a genuine top 10 defense. So all in all, the roster is ridiculously talented, and I do think just pure roster on paper, it's one of the more talented teams in the league. But let's talk about number 2, Mike Macdonald is the truth. He was one of my favorite coaching hires in this cycle. I really did believe that he was going to be something special in the NFL for the Baltimore Ravens, and he did pan out. He obviously was with Michigan for a couple years before being the defensive coordinator last year for the Baltimore Ravens and having an incredible season. His Baltimore Ravens defense became the first in NFL history to finish with a season ranking of #1 in each of the following categories: points allowed, sacks, takeaways. It also ranked #1 in the NFL in both point differential and turnover margin, and he was able to turn guys like Kyle Hamilton, Justin Matabuke, Patrick Queen, and Roquan Smith into AP All-Pro level players. And now you look at this Seahawks defense and you see some guys like Devon Witherspoon, Tariq Woolen, Boy Mafe, Tyrell Dodson, Jerome Baker, Uchenna Nwosu, Jaron Reed, and you're like, these are guys that have legitimate chances of being really good in his system. This is a defense that's going to put a lot of pressure on the opposing teams by getting a lot of sacks, forcing some turnovers, and just playing really solid football. Again, that Ravens defense last year was utterly ridiculous and in some ways carried them deep into a deep playoff run. And now you get the guy who led that defense, and now you have him with, in my opinion, just as talented of a defense. There are some really good teams in the NFC, and trust me, we'll get to that here in a little bit, but I look at this Seahawks team, and I just feel really optimistic about what they can do. Mike Macdonald, again, was one of my favorite coaching hires in this cycle. I much preferred him over the likes of Dan Quinn, Bill Belichick, and so many other names. And I thought of any of the defensive-minded coaches in this league, I would rather have nobody else but Mike Macdonald to lead my team. He's a bit younger, so he's going to be with this team for many years, and I know he's a rookie head coach and doesn't have the experience of being the guy for a total team, but given the fact that the Seattle Seahawks needed a change of style, needed a change of culture, they're getting a guy in Mike Macdonald that I think a lot of players are going to get behind and support him on his way to success. So all in all, I think this was an incredible hire. I think he fits the personnel on this team. I think he fits the personnel on this defense perfectly, and I think this defense and I think this offense is going to benefit from how good of a coach he's going to be. I don't want to say that he's going to be very similar to DeMeco Ryans, but I could definitely see a world where he is DeMeco Ryans-like. However, number 3, and my third reason as to why I think the Seahawks could be forces in 2024 is there's a lot of questions within the rest of their division. Now, in their division, in case you are unaware, and most of you guys are, but I'll repeat it anyways, are the Arizona Cardinals, are the LA Rams, and are the San Francisco 49ers. Starting off with the Arizona Cardinals, there really isn't a ton of question marks as to whether or not they'll be good next year. They won't be good, but they'll also be pretty decent all in all. The biggest question mark for them is just what is their true ceiling? Can they be competitive with the likes of the Niners or the Seahawks? Other than that, the Cardinals will likely be able to beat some bad teams, but probably won't beat very many good teams. With that said, though, I love Kyler, and I love Marvin Harrison Jr., and I think that offense should be pretty fun next year, but let's be honest, it's still a few years away from being true, genuine contenders. Then you look at the LA Rams, and the big question mark for them is injuries. They have dealt with injuries the past 2 years that have sort of derailed their season from being what they wanted it to be. with an aging quarterback in Matthew Stafford, an aging receiver in Cooper Kupp, and both those guys being tremendously injury prone, that does raise a lot of question marks about how long this Rams team can go without having some sort of injuries to deal with. That plus the departure of Aaron Donald has brought in some new faces on that defensive line that have to play big time roles for this team this upcoming season. I like Jared Verse, but man, having to step in the roles of guys like Aaron Donald is going to be tough. And while I think that team is extremely talented, and as long as they can stay healthy, I think the Rams have the talent to win that division, they gotta stay healthy, which is a massive question mark that we haven't seen the past couple years be answered. Then you look at the Niners, and really the big question mark for them is, what's going on with Brandon Ayuk? Now, as of when I'm making this video, which is currently at 8 o'clock p.m. Central Time on Tuesday, August 6th, Brandon Ayuk is currently in a ton of rumors regarding whether or not he's going to get traded. It does appear like the Patriots are the landing spot for him, which, by the way, is an awesome trade if the Patriots are able to do so. And then behind them, it does seem like the Browns are also willing to negotiate a trade that would include Amari Cooper, which if they're able to do an Amari Cooper for Brandon Ayuk swap, then I really don't care about what happens. I think either way, they're getting good receivers, so it doesn't really matter. But if for whatever reason, the San Francisco 49ers aren't able to get a talented receiver on the scale of Brandon Ayuk in return for him, then man, that really does dampen what I think that offense can do. Yes, they're still ridiculously talented, and they'll probably still be the favorites to win the NFC West and potentially the NFC in general. But now you're starting to see a little bit of some cracks in the armor of that 49ers team. With the departure potentially of Brandon Ayuk, maybe that offense isn't as good as it usually is, and maybe they have to depend a tad bit more on their defense. And while again, I think that defense is really good, they have a couple guys themselves that are coming off of injuries, and you just never know what they're going to look like post-injury. Whereas you look at the Seattle Seahawks, and in general, they really don't have too many question marks about what they're going to do. I guess really the big question mark for the Seahawks is, are they championship contenders or just playoff contenders? But if that's your only question mark, then that's a good question mark to have, I suppose. And just in general, I think that this division is still going to be run by the Niners, but I think there's question marks as to how the division will go now, and I think there's more question marks on those other teams than there are the Seattle Seahawks. All right, so let's go ahead and just kind of piece everything together here and give you guys kind of the uncomfortable truth here. The uncomfortable truth is this: likely the Seattle Seahawks will not be winning the NFC West, and more than likely they'll make the playoffs but probably lose in rounds 1 and 2. That is the uncomfortable truth that we have to get out of the way. With that being said though, if certain teams maybe deal with injuries or don't play up to expectations, I could see a world where the Seahawks team is a legitimate force and could potentially be really good next year. Again, I do believe in Mike McDonald. I do believe in this roster, and I truly do believe that this team has the talent and level of competitiveness to maybe win a couple games that they probably shouldn't win. Really, for me, my question mark comes down to, with Geno Smith. Can Geno Smith lead this team to a championship? That's really the only thing holding me back from putting this team as like a genuine, true championship contender. Because they have the talent, they have a level of head coaching that I think will get them to that level. It just comes down onto the shoulders of Geno Smith or maybe Sam Howell. With that being said though, I've made a couple other Seahawks videos in the past that talk about more predictions and what I think they'll do, so I'll have that posted up at the very end. But if you enjoyed, hit the like and subscribe button, and I love you guys. Peace.